So this is my make. This is the Valgrind. As seen, there are 25 tests that have been conducted, 25 pass, 0 fail, 0 leaks. Now this is my make file. This is my unit test.h file. These are all the tests that I have written and have conducted. Now this is the .c file, unit.c file. These are again the tests that I have ran. There's 25 of them. And now finally to show my testdefs.c file. So these are the two tests that have been given at the beginning of the lab. This one checks to see if a non-null string is being passed. If it's null, then it's correct. If it's not, then the test has failed and it throws an error. This one, another default test given to us, it's checking to see if the size of the init default, the string, is 0. If it's not, it'll throw an error. Now these are my own tests. I have a test here that checks the capacity of the init default function. It should have a capacity of 7. If it doesn't, it'll throw an error. This is another test. It checks to see if the size of init C string is correct. So I have this string test. So the test is a 4-letter word, so the size should be 4. No larger, no not smaller, not larger. This is another test that checks the capacity. Checks the capacity is larger than the size when the init C string is called. Test is a 4-letter word, so size should be larger than 4. This is another test with checking to see if the string on extraction is correct. So the extraction file function, it extracts a string from a file, should have no leading or trailing spaces after the string. There is a file that I've made that has one word in it called weather. Weather should have no leading spaces or trailing spaces. So it's checking to see if the correct string is being pulled out of the file. This next test checks to see if the size of extraction is correct. Weather is a 7-letter word. When the weather is being pulled out of the file, it should just the size should be set to 7. This next test checks to see if capacity again is smaller than larger than the size when the string is being pulled out of the file. If it's not, it'll throw an error. And in this test, it checks to see if the size on pushback is correct. So pushback adds a character to the end of the string. So I have the string testing. It should add a G to the end. So the size should not be 6, instead it should be 7 after the modification. So it's checking to see if the correct size is being set after pushback function is being called. Now in this next test, it's checking to see if the capacity on pushback is correct. Again, it's an edge case, 6-letter word. Original capacity is 7, so this is becoming a 7-letter word, so the capacity should increase. If the capacity is, again, if it's smaller than the size, then I'll throw an error. This is checking to see. This is another test done on the pushback function. String here is tested. Add a G, it should be testing. So it's checking to see if the correct string is being set after pushback is being called. And now in this test, popback, it's supposed to remove an element from the end of the string. So instead of test, it should become test. Tests is a 5-letter word with the S at the end. Test is a 4-letter word, so it's checking to see if the correct size is being set, which would be 4, as test is a 4-letter word. This test, popback, checks to see if the correct string is being pulled. So again, tests being set, test should be the string after the popback function has been called, so checking to see if the correct string is being returned. In this function, it's checking to see if you call the popback function too many times, or if you call it right after you initialize default initialization, where the size is 0, checking to see when you call it, the size does not decrement, does not become negative, because size can't be negative. In this test, checking to see if the correct character is being returned. Again, we have this string, testing. We're calling the 4th element of the string, so T, E, S, T is 3, I is 4, so I should be returned. If it's the correct character, it should be I. I is the correct character. This next test, checking to see if the correct size is being returned on the C string. So we have this string ballot, which is a 6-letter word. It's checking to see if the null character counts towards the size, which it shouldn't. There are 7 characters here, ballot including the null character, but the size should still be 6. The size should not include the null character at the end. In this test, checking to see if the capacity is larger than the size. If you have a size that is 1 less than the capacity, then it should, in essence, it should create enough space, 1 more character for the null character. It should not. It really shouldn't double the size, but again, it's just checking to see if the capacity is greater than the size after resizing operations have been done. In this next test, I'm checking to see if the correct C string, is being returned after the C string function has been called. So I've made this, I've initialized the string, so tests, calling the function to create it into a C string by adding the null character at the end, checking to see if the correct string has been returned. If it hasn't, it throws an error. The next test, string concat. So now I'm checking to see if the correct string is being returned when the concat function is being called. So I have these 2 strings, weather and proof. Proof is being concatenated onto weather, so it should become weather proof. Checking to see if the correct string, again, is being returned. No spaces, nothing. Correct string. So in this next test, I'm checking to see if the correct size is being returned. Weather is a 7-letter word, proof is a 5-letter word. If you concat them both together, it should become a 12-letter word. So it should be no less, no greater, so 12 letters. In this test, I'm checking to see, again, capacity on concat. I'm checking to see if I'm checking to see if the capacity is larger than the size. There are resizing operations being done here. When you concat, you might go over the capacity, which is what's happening here, checking to see if the capacity is still larger than the size. In this next test, I'm checking to see if the Boolean value is the correct value being returned. So if it is an empty string, if it's null, then it should return true. If it isn't, then it should return false. So checking to see if the correct value is being returned here. And now in this, one of the last few tests I have here, so I'm checking to see if the compare values are correct. So when you call this compare function value, it's comparing this string test with this string comp. It should return a positive value. If it doesn't, it throws an error. comparing it lexographically, I think it was. So checking to see if the right value is being returned. This one is similar to the previous test, except that now these two strings are identical. So instead of returning a positive or negative value, it should just return 0. And if it doesn't, throws an error. And in this last test, I'm checking to see if the destroy function does its job and returns a null opaque pointer. So I create this string test, destroy it, should return null. Each string should be null. If it isn't, again, throws an error, and it doesn't pass the test. So these are my 25 tests, and they all passed.